Welcome to Truth and Reckoning, a broadcast from CELDF. In this show, we'll learn from frontline organizers and communities fighting against environmental destruction. We'll explore different perspectives and innovative strategies for movement building, the potency and the potential of rights of nature, and effective action in defense of our communities. And we'll share inspiring stories of people working towards right relationship with the land and each other. I am your host, Max Wilbert. And today's show is going to be focused on a new law that was introduced into the New York State Assembly several weeks ago. It's called the Great Lakes and New York Waters Bill of Rights, and this law is actually revolutionary in character. It would completely overturn the way in which our societies interact with the natural world, and I think it's an example of what some people call revolutionary reform. It takes the shape of an action within the status quo, but it amounts to a fundamental challenge to that status quo. We're going to pivot to talk about that in a few minutes here. But before we get to that topic, I want to give a little bit of an introduction because this is the first episode of this new program. So welcome to all the viewers, all the listeners, and please, share this show around. We're just getting started and we're hoping to get this material and content out to a wide range of folks. Broadly speaking, this show exists because we live in a time of ecological crisis. Life on Earth is facing multiple existential threats, whether you're talking about pollution and chemical contamination issues, global warming, or as some call it, global climate destabilization, the destruction of forests and wetlands and other habitats all around the world, leading to soil erosion and intensifying extreme weather, desertification, the breakdown of water cycle and nutrient cycles, the collapse of biodiversity, which is plummeting around the world, and not just through extinction, but actually through declines in even common species of wildlife. I often think about the American robin, which when I was a kid was very common. You can still see many of them everywhere, but their numbers are actually declining pretty rapidly. And the same is true of abundant species likely around you, wherever you live. So folks who are listening might be familiar with all these issues. It might be new to you. Either way, you're welcome here. This show is about dealing with these serious problems. It's about solutions. It's about organizing, determination, sacrifice, and hard work to address these crises because other people aren't going to solve them for us. Corporations and elites are getting rich off the status quo, as Ben has written extensively about in his book from a couple of years ago. And governments are corrupt and co-opted. Mass media and internet corporations are shaping a popular discourse that just uses tribalism and racism and other forms of discrimination to divide people and entertainment to distract us, all of which ensures that these power structures go unchallenged. So these are all topics that we're going to explore on this show in coming months, but our focus will always be on action. To introduce where we're coming from, I'm going to turn to Ben here in a minute, who's going to speak about the organization behind this show, the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund. I am relatively new to this organization. I've been friends with different folks in the group and have followed its work for many years, but I'm new. And so along with the listeners to the show, I'm going to be learning along with you. I'm going to be getting oriented to the people and the places and the history of this movement. For myself, my name is Max Wilbert. As I mentioned, I'm a writer, a wilderness guide, a biocentric community organizer. I'm the author of 2 books, most recently, Bright Green Lies, How the Environmental Movement Lost Its Way and What We Can Do About It. And I write a newsletter on Substack as well called Biocentric. I've been a grassroots organizer for more than a couple decades now, first in anti-racist movements, then in anti-war movements and anti-globalization movements, and more recently in environmental work over the last 15 years or so. That work has taken me all over the world to climate research in the Siberian Arctic, to front lines with environmental defenders in the Philippines. And my most recent big project was struggling against greenwashing with a lithium mine project in Thacker Pass, Nevada. So I won't do this lengthy introduction to myself on every show. This is about the guests who we have here, but because we're just getting started, I want everyone to know who I am and where I'm coming from. But I want to pivot to our guests. These are the voices we're going to be hearing repeatedly here. Friends of mine, colleagues at the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund, or CELDF, as we call it. Tish O'Dell, who's calling in from Ohio, and Ben Price, who's joining us from Pennsylvania. And I'm going to ask you each to introduce yourself. And why don't we start with Ben? Like I said, Ben, I'm hoping you can tell us a little bit more about CELDF, its origin story, its history, the transformations it's gone through. And then Tish, will pivot to you and ask you to introduce the idea which we're here today to discuss, which is really the rights of nature. So Ben, please.
Oh, thanks an awful lot, Max, for the introduction and for setting things up. We hope that this is going to be a really invited resource for people. So let me just begin by doing just what you asked, which is explain what CELDF is all about. And to begin with, the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund was founded in 1995. I joined working with the group in 2003, full-time in 2004 as a community organizer. In fact, their first and only for a number of years. And our work evolved over the years. One thing I'll say about CELDF is that we're not a static organization. We don't pick something like we're going to save the elephants or we're going to save this ecosystem or that one. We're really looking at the larger picture. What are the deep-rooted causes of the ecological crises that we're facing today? And more than that, we didn't start working just on environmental issues per se. When I began organizing in communities, we started in Pennsylvania and eventually expanded across the US and began working internationally as well. But entering the communities and listening to their concerns, usually it was about a site fight, something like, we're going to have fracking introduced into our community, or they're going to expand a toxic waste dump, or aerial pesticide spraying in order to eliminate pests on a timber crop, of course, poisoning the whole community in the process. And what I usually would say, and what our organization and organizers have said to communities for years now, is you really don't have a fracking problem, a pesticide problem, a waste dump problem. What you have is a problem with the denial of your fundamental community rights, your right to self-determination as a collective in a place-based community. So we did a lot of education. When we walked in to work with a community, the purpose at first, our focus was on helping them to craft laws that would be enacted locally by their municipality or county or tribe that would, in effect, challenge the existing structure of law that, as it stands today and has stood for years, actually makes it illegal for communities to protect their local environment. And if it interferes with economic plans or the so-called rights of corporate property or the profit-making interests of investors. And so the rights of communities, their right to health, safety, and welfare, and their right to protect their own land base were denied when those rights came into conflict with corporate rights. And so that's been central to so much of our organizing over the years. We did develop beyond our first, where we first began, though. We started in a very traditional way, and that was representing communities before regulatory agencies, attempting to help them to block the issuance of permits that would allow noxious corporate projects to go forward. Uh, that is a tactic that we gave up on within about 5 years. And so when I came on with CELDF, it was with the purpose of actualizing a vision for communities that went beyond traditional progressive environmentalism and went to the deep problems. And we saw ourselves as radical and still do in a very positive way. Radical in the sense of going to the root of the problem. Why is it okay for a corporation to toxify a community? Why is it okay to create dead zones in our waterways? Why is it okay to create sacrifice zones and make our municipalities into resource extraction colonies of the corporate state? Asking those questions, we've learned some interesting things from history that we generally aren't taught in our schools. And we gathered a lot of that information, and we did a lot further research. We put together our democracy schools, weekend seminars that to instruct communities about what it is they're actually up against, because it became very clear to us that people don't understand that the system of law under which we all suffer uh, doesn't actually produce the outcomes that our legends and all of our celebrations of national holidays would lead us to believe are possible. And there's nothing like um, separating people from their illusions to help them find a path forward. And that's been a large part of what we've been doing. Um, 30 years of work and more than 20 for me as an organizer and as a staff member with CELDF. It's too much to sum up in a couple of minutes, and I won't take much more time here, but just to say we are continuing on a course that has changed a bit, knowing that the legal system does not serve the interests of people and communities and nature, knowing that it serves to expand and protect the privileges of the already privileged. We're not recommending that lawmaking is the best strategy or tactic in order to stand up against the real death march that our culture and our economy are driving us into. And so let me stop there because I could certainly add a lot more and then bring us into the present, but I want to make time and let I'd like to have Tish introduce herself and share some of her thoughts on it as well.
Yeah, just quickly, for listeners, Ben's knowledge of the history of the development of corporate power in the United States, the sort of anti-revolution that occurred within the American Revolution as, the wealthy, propertied, moneyed class, the elites of the time sort of exerted themselves in the formation of the Constitution itself to insert language and ideals into that document that have shaped our society ever since. We should really call you Professor Price because, and I don't say that in jest because your knowledge on these topics is really encyclopedic. And I hope that on some future episodes of this show, we'll have a chance to really dive into that in some detail. So thanks for that,
That
Ben.
Thanks a lot, Max. And sorry, but I'm going to reject the title, just as I reject the title of attorney when I'm accused of it. but but yes, I think that what that means is that every one of us has the potential and the possibility to dig in, research, and find out
Mhm.
what the real facts are about this nation's past and where it's heading, which is very consistent with its twisted past, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for that. And just to say it explicitly, Ben is our education director at CELDF. He's led countless of these democracy schools like he's talked about. And he was also one of the community organizers behind the Tamaqua, Pennsylvania Rights of Nature bill, which is widely recognized as the first or one of the first rights of nature efforts anywhere in the world. Um, so I want to pivot to Tish now. Tish, would you mind telling us who you are, what your background is, how you got involved with CELDF, and then how you perceive this rights of nature strategy? Because we haven't talked about this in much detail. Ben sort of introduced us to the problem in terms of corporate capture, the lack of democracy. He said something like, "You don't have a fracking problem; you have a self-determination problem." Um, and I'm curious to hear from you, Tish, who you are, what your role is, and about this rights of nature approach to solving these issues as we begin to transition towards looking at this New York bill.
Hi, Max. Thanks. And Ben, Professor Price, I should say. Professor Price is the one who changed my world too. My worldview about everything, the Constitution, democracy, all that. He shattered all the illusions that I had been taught in school and raised with in our culture. But
I'm
I
sorry,
spent,
Tish.
yeah, it's all because of you. Um, no, I just, was your typical, American just living my life and in Broadview Heights, Ohio, raising my son. And one day I found out that urban fracking was coming to my community. So issue specific. That's how I got into it too. And tried to use all the tools that I thought our democracy provided to me. So going to electeds and that electeds would listen to us. I actually ran for office thinking I could do something that way, learned all about the electoral process. And it was actually no one would help at the state level or the local level to stop it. At the local, they said our hands are tied. And then I learned about preemption later from Ben in democracy school. But yeah, it's really kind of surprising. All of us think we have these rights. We talk about rights and we think we have them. And we have democratic principles, guiding our communities and our laws. But what I didn't realize, I thought the people wrote the laws because that's what we're taught in school. And finding out then it's the corporations that are writing the laws and they're writing them for their benefit, their profits. The Constitution was like the biggest, I think, surprise to me that it wasn't what I had been taught at all. And Ben can go into it a lot more, but the idea that our Constitution is commerce based and commerce we know is about money, right? So that's something we're not, I think, taught at all. And then when you tie that to the environmental things that are happening and the degradation of the environment, it makes total sense that everything operates because of money. That's what's at the center of our world, our Constitution, and our culture. But anyway, so I got into this back in 2010 when that came to my community, and then started working with CELDF in 2012 part-time as an organizer in Ohio. And that grew. Then I also taught democracy schools, and it's always a learning process. So when you said, Max, you're going to be learning, it's like I'm still learning. Like we learn continuously and change. And I like to say we evolve just like nature does. I got involved then. We did about, I would say 40 attempts in Ohio. Started in my community and passed a rights of nature law, the first in Ohio, which Ben obviously was very involved with, and CELDF helped us draft. We put it on a ballot. It passed by over 60% in my community to stop this drilling and fracking. And then almost immediately, we were sued by two drilling companies, which don't live or operate. They don't even have a business place within the city. And the courts ruled in favor to overturn the law. So that was a big shockaroo for us, for me, and the people who live here.
Can
But
I Can I highlight this for a second, Tish? I want you to
Sure.
continue, but I don't want to gloss over that because it seems so important. And this is something that I always emphasize when I'm talking about CELDF's work and rights of nature approaches in general, is that you see this pattern repeatedly where communities are facing a threat, something that they don't want. They organize using the existing legal structure and pass a law, like you said you all did in your own community. And then a corporation sues your community and says that law is illegal. You're not allowed to stop us from poisoning your water and introducing carcinogens into, the air and the water and the soil around your community,
Right.
where your
Because it's
kids live.
violating their rights. Yeah.
Right. And the court rules on the corporation side. It's so striking as blatantly anti-democratic,
Mhm.
blatantly against the will of the people that I don't want to paper that over. But please continue because you're saying this was the first of 40, did you say?
40 attempts in Ohio. Yeah, I started organizing then after Broadview Heights in my community, and we had many attempts. And what we found was the more we pushed and did this, because I think part of the reason they sue and try to get the laws overturned, because the very beginning ones of CELDF, like Tamaqua Borough, never got challenged, right? At the beginning, the corporations didn't take it that seriously. Oh, these are a few people just doing this, but that's the idea of a movement, right? As you get more and more, and that they'll also try this. And that's what happened as we got more and more communities working to draft laws, pass laws that challenged corporate power and had rights of nature included. The pushback just got more and more, obviously. Then they realized they had to shut this down. And so they thought with shutting them down in the courts and overturning them, that would be the end of it. But in Ohio, they shut ours down, but then more and more communities said, hey, that's a good idea. We want to do that too. We want to do that. And so it kept growing and growing. And like I said, we had over 40 attempts. Youngstown, Ohio tried 9 times or 10 times, I believe, to pass a community bill of rights. And you just saw it getting what they did is first they would, put money into it, a campaign, right, to get people to vote against their own best interests. Well, then that didn't work. They came back again. And then they would go to, well, now we're going to pass laws. And they would do it very sneakily. So challenging, like in Ohio, we have the right to initiative, which is the right to pass laws by the people. We're like the fourth branch of the government, I guess, legislation by the people. And the more we did that, then we saw them passing laws challenging our right to, which is in our state constitution, to even do this process. Um, they said we get to review these before they go on the ballot. And that's how they'd keep them off then. The Board of Elections or the Secretary of State can look at it and say, no, this is illegal or unconstitutional. Keep it off the ballot. So this became a battle. This wasn't just happening in Ohio. This was happening in Pennsylvania as well. It was happening in New Hampshire, happening out in Oregon and the state of Washington, New Mexico, Colorado. So there was it was moving throughout the country at the same time. And we saw all the same patterns happening, where then the state would try to shut it down completely. And it got so bad here in Ohio that after the Lake Erie Bill of Rights, which we can talk about as well, but that was in 2019 that passed by the people, and then in 2020 a court overturned it. The state of Ohio actually inserted language into a budget bill that made it illegal for any other community in Ohio to try and pass a rights of nature law and to bring nature into the court as a party to withstanding. So yeah, a lot of pushback.
It's fascinating because, there has been reporting on these stories, right? Grant Township was in Rolling Stone, and there's been news coverage about all of these issues. The Lake Erie Bill of Rights was front page news in parts of the country. And yet it's striking to me that this story has still really not been told in its entirety to give justice to the scope of what has occurred in some ways over the last 20 years in the rights of nature movement, which is basically a grassroots uprising to try and create democracy for sustainability, and a reactionary response led by corporations allied with the state to shut down that process in all kinds of different ways. Is that accurate? An accurate characterization, would you say?
Yeah, I would. Wouldn't you, Ben? You're on mute, Ben.
Thank you. Yeah, I think you said it very well, Max. It really is um, a stark wake-up call for a lot of people. You know, folks that went through our democracy schools often talked about having epiphanies and having aha moments and saying, I never realized. One of the key reasons for walking a community through a campaign to enact a local law that states what the community actually intends, what they deserve and what they want, as opposed to begging through law for the scraps that they think they could probably get if they're nice. And so these are real challenges to the power structure as it is, but walking folks through it and having them look at the language and say, well, yeah, it's controversial when you put it up against the laws that exist, but there's nothing controversial about allowing people to determine their own fate as a community. And so they would get behind them and they would begin to really internalize it and make it their law and make it their expression of their rights and where they wanted to go in the future with their communities. The real learning experience wasn't if they got the law passed. And yeah, of course, people celebrate. But when the laws were challenged, that's when the real learning happened. That's when people really found out what's what, how the law works and who it works for, and that it does not work for the average person, that it works for the privileged, the already privileged. That was the real value in, you know, Tish says, 40 attempts in Ohio, hundreds and hundreds of attempts throughout the country over 20 years, 25 years of work on these things. And I would say that it's not as though all of the ordinances and laws were challenged after they were enacted. About 10% were. And of the 10%, probably the large majority were overturned by the courts because the courts and the laws that we have are designed to disallow communities to make decisions for themselves. And in the US, individualism and property rights are at the top of the pyramid in terms of the law. Collective rights are not only frowned upon, but they're actually villainized. The idea that a community can come together, the next thing you have is a politician calling you out for being a communist or a socialist or something, some other thing that has been uh, labeled as evil in the eyes of the power structure in this country. And so we're up against a lot of psychological barriers as well as legal barriers. People don't like being lumped in with radicals, and many of the communities, I would say, the large majority of communities we worked in, maybe counterintuitively, were not progressive communities looking to exercise their rights as progressives or want to say they want to do. But the vast majority I would characterize as conservative and rural, with the exceptions of places like Toledo with the Lake Erie Bill of Rights and Pittsburgh with a fracking ban and recognition of the rights of local ecosystems. And New York State, we'll see what happens there, just had this bill introduced on the rights of the Great Lakes and state waters of New York, just introduced into the legislature in a strengthened version. It had been introduced earlier. It's now been amended and updated. And we'll talk about that some more in a bit, I guess. But just to say, again, many of the communities that favored enacting laws that recognize the rights of nature and local ecosystems were enacted not so much on a philosophical basis, I would say, but on a pragmatic one. That how else can we put a force equal to or greater than that of corporate claims of corporate property rights as persons? How can we stand up to that when the people in the community supposedly have rights, but they're not enough to withstand the onslaught of corporate money and the force of the law behind them? And so rights of nature was an alternative to the system as it stands. If the ecosystems that are being threatened by these corporate projects themselves have rights in and of themselves, not rights that are enjoyed by the people who live there, but rights for the ecosystem itself. Now we have a whole different power dynamic in terms of rights. Now we have an ecosystem that can say through the people living in that community, speaking on its behalf, no, you can't do this. I won't allow it. I have rights. That's a new thing under the sun. And it was a new thing for the people in Tamaqua in 2006 when they enacted the first rights of nature law anywhere. Rather conservative community in anthracite coal country in Pennsylvania. And they did it because it just made sense to them. And yes, they do love nature. They may have a different relationship with it than our progressive friends. They may have a different relationship to it from the rights of nature movement, which actually does not encompass a monolithic view of rights of nature, in fact. But we are, I think, as a nation, at the local level at least, very clear that we're tired of being treated like, and I'll say for the rural communities, flyover zones. And they're also really tired of being used as sacrifice zones in order to keep the economy going and make sure that the urban populations have everything they need to be comfortable, all of their conveniences and luxuries. And then to ship out the waste materials from producing all of that to the rural communities because they have land. And now they have poisoned land.
Yep. Yeah, thanks for that, Ben. And I want to kind of circle back around in a few minutes here to a question that you started to address earlier, which is, given that these laws are often, at least in some cases, getting struck down, why do we continue to do it? But before we get there, I want to focus on what's happening in New York. The Great Lakes and New York Waters Bill of Rights. And Tish, maybe you can begin to speak to this and Ben can jump in. Just for people who are new to this, what is this law? What does it say? And what would be the effect of this law if it actually were implemented?
Yep. Just a really brief background, the Great Lakes Bill of Rights in New York exists because of the Lake Erie Bill of Rights in Toledo. So that was passed by the people, but this legislator who's introduced this, Patrick Burke, who's in the western part of New York, Buffalo, Niagara area, he saw the Lake Erie Bill of Rights. News on that being passed. And then without us knowing it, he had taken the language we had helped Toledo residents draft for that, and he created it for New York at the time. So he's got quite a few years experience before this version. Then we had in 2020, like I said, the Lake Erie Bill of Rights was overturned in federal court by a federal judge. And he actually contacted us again after that and said, hey, could you help me draft a Great Lakes Bill of Rights? And, I just did the Lake Erie Bill of Rights, but and I kind of was taken aback and said, well, you do know that the federal judge overturned the Lake Erie Bill of Rights, right? You saw that news? And he's like, yeah, I know that. He's like, but I realized one lake in the Great Lakes system, because for people who don't know, there's 5 Great Lakes and they're all interconnected. He said it's not enough to just protect one of those lakes. We need to protect all 5 of them. So that was kind of surprising. The other surprising thing for Ben and I and all of us at CELDF is that we had a state legislator contacting us about wanting to do a state bill on nature. For that's not part of our 30-year history that we have a state legislator wanting to introduce rights of nature into state law. So, it was an opportunity that came to us, I think. And so normally we're from the grassroots up, from these community groups, and our kind of strategy had been that, is like we said, it grew, right? 40 in Ohio, hundreds across the United States, would push itself up. And there were in other states people that tried to get it into state legislators or a state amendment to the Constitution, and it, didn't get very so we had never worked this way from the state coming, now we're finding ourselves having to educate the people in New York about this bill and what rights of nature is. So it's a little bit of a reverse process, but that's okay. We're happy with that. But anyway, so we had helped him draft the first version of the Great Lakes Bill of Rights. And then with everything, we heard from people in the communities, and they were, like saying, well, it should include this, or people would contact us from New York City or in other places in New York, the Finger Lakes or whatever, and say, well, we're not connected to the Great Lakes, but this should include us too. So that's how it expanded in this version to an all New York waters, because we said, well, yeah, Lake Erie and the Great Lakes are important, but so are the waters in your communities too. And since this is state legislation, why not? It should include that too. So basically what this law does is it's basically giving rights to all the waters in New York, not just the Great Lakes, to have rights to exist, flourish, evolve, regenerate, not be monetized, privatized, and that it also limits the rights of corporations in communities that choose to enact laws to protect the waters in their community. So, yeah, it's very broad sweeping, and I'm sure there's corporations, and it's interesting though too, we've also not just corporate groups aren't going to like this, but we've also had pushback even from some environmental groups and water keeper groups, because, and I think again, it's a lack of understanding this idea that it's illegal. So for example, a lawyer from one of these environmental groups got on one of our calls and said, well, I can only support this if you take out all the illegal and unconstitutional parts of it. And I think people have don't have an understanding of how do you fight something that's wrong with our laws? Like our laws are perfect somehow, like they were, brought down by the angels and somehow they're perfect. And they're not, because our culture changes. Our ideas of what a society values changes over time. And I try to tell people this when I'm talking to them. Look at laws we had in the past that we've now overturned and changed. Like women didn't have rights, for example. We didn't have the right to vote or own property. Well, we couldn't go to the courts for relief saying, I should, have this right, because it wasn't recognized anywhere. So how do you go somewhere to a legal system and say my rights are being violated when no one recognizes those rights in the system? So that's where nature finds itself right now. It's invisible under our law because the rights aren't recognized. Corporate rights are recognized, human rights are recognized sometimes, not always, but yeah, nature is invisible. So that's the first step, has to be recognizing the rights of nature to exist, to thrive, to flourish, before you can then go to court to say those rights are being violated.
Right. I wanted to add another part of the bill that was included in the amendment for this legislative session is actually it's taken from some state constitutional amendments that we had drafted years ago and modified some. But what it does is it adds to this recognition of the rights of the Great Lakes and the waters of the state. It empowers local governments to do exactly what CELDF has been attempting to help them do over all these years. So it recognizes the authority of municipalities and counties to enact local laws to further protect their local environments, and using the model for the full state, but expanding and applying that at the local level. And what's significant is that along with that authority comes immunity from state preemption. So when a municipality protects itself against toxins in some way, and then uses that to say no to a landfill, for instance, normally the next thing you could expect is a lawsuit from the waste hauling corporation to overturn the local law, and then going to court where then the state judge would side with the corporation and say, yeah, the law is very clear. You can't protect your local environment more strictly than the state allows in our regulation. So this takes that out of the picture, and it says, you pass the law, protect your community, the state will not stop you. And the state will not recognize claimed rights of corporations to overturn those decisions at the local level. That this is a fundamental right that cannot be denied either by the state or by private parties. And so that's a significant boosting of really putting teeth in the law in a way that no state law anywhere in any state allows at this point.
Well, and I was going to say, and a lot of people say to me, but we already have laws that protect the water. You know, like we already have the Clean Water Act and, you know, things like that. We don't, why would we need this? And I think that's another piece of confusion. And my response to them usually is, okay, we've had those laws on the books for 50 years. And if you look at like any website, even the EPA's website, it will tell you the number just keeps going up. It's almost 50% now of all lakes, rivers, and streams in the United States are too polluted for fishing, swimming, or drinking. So my is like, are we just going to keep going down this road? I mean, and the people who instituted those laws back 50 years ago, they had good intentions. They were meant to protect the waters, I think, but we're now 50 years past that and we can see it's not working. So do we just keep going down that path so that in another 50 years it's 100% of the waters are too polluted for fishing, drinking, or swimming? I don't know. I'm like, we have to consider something different. And so through this analysis that we've done of our legal system, and then with the data we have from the past 50 years, I mean, we don't know if this will work either, right? We have no guarantees. I don't have a crystal ball, but I do know that I don't want to keep doing what we've done for the past 50 years. I'd like to try something different. And we are starting to have some examples from other countries. So from Ecuador, we have some examples now because they put rights of nature into their constitution in 2008, and CELDF was a part of that, helping them draft some of that language in the constitution. But it's taken all this time, and now the court cases are coming out and the decisions are coming out actually ruling in favor of nature. And so when I said the rights have to be recognized to go to court, so what they are allowed to do in Ecuador, and this is what people in New York could be allowed to do if this law passed in New York, is in Ecuador, they're saying, okay, well, this mining company wants to mine in the cloud forest. Well, the people now can speak on behalf of the cloud forest and come and say, well, wait a minute, you can't do that because it's going to violate the rights of the cloud forest. So now it puts the corporations in a position in court to have to prove to the court that they won't violate the rights of the cloud forest. I mean, and if they can prove they won't, then I would assume the judge is still going to allow the project to go forward, issue the permit and all that. But we don't have it in this country. We can't do that. And so what we have to do, the permit gets issued, the project happens, the harm occurs, and then the best we can hope, if we can find a lawyer that'll take a case or we can afford to pay a lawyer, is to try to go to court to try and mitigate or get money if we've gotten sick from the poisoning of that project, or to make the environment whole again, like thinking that money can fix all these horrible things that have happened. I mean, if a stream is dead, it's dead. I mean, you can't bring it back to life. So, and
And
if you're really sick from it, money may not solve your health problems either. So,
yeah, in essence, when we see the decisions made by the Ecuadorian courts, who have, to their credit, taken seriously the constitutional rights of Pachamama, Mother Earth. Um, what we see is they're using what's called, um, I'm sorry, my brain just went dead.
precautionary
The
principle?
precautionary principle. Thank you.
I just got in your head.
It's got stuck. I couldn't get it out. Right. So the precautionary principle, which what it does in legal terms is it changes the burden of proof. So under American law, the burden of proof is on the victim. You say you're sick, and you say you're sick because of what Corporation X did. Okay, you have to prove that the molecule that caused your cancer or caused whatever the issue is, um, actually came from that project. The burden of proof is on you to prove that it wasn't something else. It wasn't the fact that when you were a kid, you got X-rays for tonsillitis or something. I mean, just making something silly up, but in fact, that's the kind of silly arguments that are made. You can't prove that it was our project, the corporation's talking, and so you can't prove that we're culpable parties. In Ecuador, before a corporation can go forward, as Tish was saying, they would have to demonstrate that what they're proposing to do could not violate the rights of nature. And in fact, we know, for instance, gold mining that they've been trying to do, or oil extraction that they've been trying to do. We know that they will harm the rights of nature, and therefore, on their face, are illegal under the Constitution in Ecuador. So changing that burden of proof is big, and in fact, it's common sense, which may explain why we haven't thought of it yet in this country.
Yeah, I want to go back just briefly to what Tish said a few minutes ago, where you were saying how, this New York bill isn't perfect. It doesn't contain all the answers, but it's the seed of something different, an alternative approach, a different way of looking at how do we negotiate problems of sustainability and our relationship with the natural world, our integration into the natural world, the fact that we're part of the ecosystems in which we live, and they influence us and we influence them, and we're part of this cycle. Um, it's very interesting to me. It seems like this type of law in New York, despite the fact that it's not perfect, that it doesn't cover everything, um, it seems like sort of a declaration, a shout, a shot across the bow, an opportunity for people to simply say, we need a different path, and that path has to value the natural world and its inherent rights to exist, to flourish, to thrive, to evolve, to not be poisoned and bulldozed and clear cut and dredged and destroyed over and over again in these countless ways. So in that sense, it's very beautiful to see, and I think it's why the rights of nature movement, as you alluded to, Ben, with its spread around the world, has done so. Why it's resonated in so many places and with so many people, because it's an attempt to articulate the value, an alternative set of values to the values of exploitation and an extractive relationship, purely extractive relationship to the natural world. And we've seen the road that that's taking us down.
Well, just like this bill, I mean, we're talking about it, right? We're sharing this idea, and that's what we're hoping in New York, that the people, much rather have this conversation about Lake Erie having, the right to exist and flourish, and how does that impact me? I drink the water from it. The people in New York, you drink the water from Lake Erie, so the poisons that are put into that water, you're now permitting those to be put into yourself. I'd rather talk about this than talking with people about the regulatory hearing coming up where we're going to decide how much poison I have to accept in my drinking water and in my body.
Right,
Yeah. I
right.
mean,
And Max, you're right to no bill will be perfect. No bill that we could think of would cover all the bases. In fact, what I think we understand is we need a real paradigm shift in this society. We need a change of heart. Indigenous folks seem to have, well, they obviously have a different kind of relationship with the natural world than industrialized society does. And I'm not suggesting that we can, in any manner, in the next few years or even the next couple of generations, make that kind of a shift in the American mind. But a lot of what we're talking about here, with it, having a law like this introduced in New York, with laws like these introduced in Ohio, in New Mexico, in Oregon, in Washington, and at least 20 other states, they, in some ways, they work towards normalizing the idea that there's a different relationship for us to have and how we relate to the natural world. And when we say natural world, that includes people too, because we deny that human beings are separate and superior to the natural world. We deny that we're not nature itself. And we've begun to talk about the word nature as an othering term, as a term that helps us distance the non-human part of reality from us, as though, well, we are superior to it, and since we're superior, we can use it, we can exploit it, we can own it, we can treat it like a slave. And that certainly would need to change for the trajectory of our ecological demise to change as well. So through law, which is itself coercive, maybe that's a way to begin. But in the end, I believe what we have to do is internalize the values that we're talking about, internalize that relationship to each other and to the rest of the world, so that we recognize ourselves as part of that reality, not separate from it, which is unfortunately what industrialized societies have done. They've created a system of governance that denies the unity of life on Earth. And denying the facts that are right in front of you, I think, has some psychological issues connected with it.
So I want to start moving us towards close here. I have a final question for each of you. And Ben, I'd like to start with you and ask you, to address the criticism that Tish brought up earlier from that lawyer that she mentioned, the environmental group who's saying, why do this? Why even bother if this is unconstitutional? If this approach is in a fundamental clash with established law, established precedent, um, uh, then why do you take this approach? Why do you think it's important? And I want to ask you this question because I know that you have a background in anarchism and in, sort of a more explicitly revolutionary perspective. How do we challenge these systems of power that are dominating the world today? And I think probably part of your answer is you don't start by accepting the established principles or the established status quo. You start by challenging it, right?
Exactly. And when folks say why we can't be on the same bandwagon with you because you're challenging the Constitution as though it were a sacred document. If the legend of America has any at all truth to it, if it's even just aspirational, the aspiration isn't that we're going to have laws dictated to us and that we have no opportunity to challenge them and say they need to be changed, even reversed, even the opposite of what they propose. That would be a democratic process where the opportunity to adjust the rules for the living generation exists, because the living generation are being, as of now, governed by dead people. I mean, that's what stare decisis, the legal idea that decisions of past courts should not be overruled, um, except for when racist slave owning judges made law. My question is, should we still be bound by that law? That's the first thing. Ursula Le Guin, an author that I enjoy reading quite a lot over the years, talked about, and I'll be paraphrasing, I can't quote it exactly, but she said, um, it's not a given, it's not a foregone conclusion that corporations will rule us forever. We once had divine right kings, and we no longer do. Well, I'm all for that. I'm not a real believer that the arc of history uh, is towards justice, unfortunately, because Martin Luther King, his heart was golden, but I'm not sure that that's the read I would take from my understanding of history. I think that the rhetoric has certainly improved. The reality hasn't as much. It hasn't. We've improved some things. When I say we collectively, as human beings, we've tried in some ways, and yet we've made concessions that have made things exponentially worse in other directions, and so the gains are lost. When the 15th Amendment was enacted, and Black Americans were allowed to vote, sounds like a real win. Except for what happened then is that whether you're Black, white, or male or female, what can be accomplished through voting has been diminished to the point of irrelevance. And so supposed rights to the franchise may sound like a liberatory movement, but it's only superficial when the underlying authority of your vote is stripped. When you can't vote for a law that protects your drinking water, the air you breathe, and the soil you grow your food in. When it's illegal to do that, who cares if you can vote? Who cares? And so my answer to the critic of the Great Lakes and Waters of New York Bill of Rights is that we must have the right to change constitutions and to change laws, or we're slaves. And if you concede that you can't change those laws, that seems to me a surrender to slavery. And if that sounds sufficiently anarchistic for you, I feel okay about it.
Thanks for that, Ben. Powerfully said. So, Tish, feel free to add anything you want, but the question that I have for you specifically is how can people get involved if they want to support the bill in New York, or if they want to bring a similar bill to their community, large or small?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to add that there's a lot I want to add to that conversation, but I won't. We'll be here all day. But anyway, I mean, I think too, one of the things I want to say, it's this idea of cultural shift has to happen, and Ben alluded to some of that. Like we have to see ourselves, we're just one species within an ecosystem, and not separate from it. But we have our whole culture is like focused on separating us from nature and from each other. And so I would say the bill in New York, what's really interesting about it for me is this idea that, we have a common enemy. Like normally they're so good at the divide and conquer, so whatever your skin color is, or whatever gender you are, or whatever religion you believe in and all that, those are all meant. But it's like, guess what? We all need air to breathe. We all need water to drink. We all need food to eat to survive. And that all comes from the natural world. And so as we keep I see it as a way to bring people and community together with the non-human world, that once we can see that we are all connected. So, that's that phrase we've kind of talked about the last few years. Does law change culture? Which is kind of the first part of CELDF's, I think, work the first 3 decades. We thought law could change culture, whereas now we're kind of like, or does culture change the law? Which comes first, chicken or the egg kind of story. So anyway, it's just something for people to think about. But if they want to help support the New York bill, we do have a sign-on support letter, which it's not a petition and you can sign it from anywhere. But just again, this idea, because sharing the idea of rights of nature and the rights of nature for the Great Lakes and the waterways of New York, that's really important. And even if you sign on the support letter, it just is connecting more people to that idea. And that is something I realized working in Ohio, and especially with the Lake Erie Bill of Rights, that's what scares the status quo, is the sharing of the ideas that go against what we currently function under, what we have, the laws and rules we have in our system. So it has that benefit. And then also, we're hoping other states in the Great Lakes area or other states will pick this up and say, this is a great idea, we need to do it too. And they can do that by going to the CELDF website. We have a contact form that you can fill out. And I'm sure we'll put it in the links attached to this recording and conversation. But yeah, you can complete that and then we'll get in touch with you. There is no cookie cutter approach here. We have a personal conversation with people who reach out to us to find out what they want to do in their community, because no 2 communities are alike. And just we'll see where it goes. If we have anything to offer, advice, we will share that from our past 30 years. And it always all begins with a conversation. 2 people leads to sometimes 4 people to 6 people, and on it goes.
Thank you, Tish. And folks who reach out via the website CELDF.org will likely be talking to you. So, well, that's it. Thank you both for taking the time to do this today. I'll look forward to having many more great conversations with you and other guests on this show. I want to thank our listeners. If folks want to support Truth and Reckoning, please share this broadcast with your friends and family. Leave us a positive review via whatever podcast app or system you're using to listen to this. You can find the show on YouTube as well. You can leave a comment there, thumbs up. That really helps make sure that the show is spread out to other people. And if you want to contribute financially to this show and to the work that we're talking about here, this community organizing, you can go to the website CELDF.org and click the donate button. And I always like to finish podcast conversations that I have by pointing out that the real point of all this work is to empower people to take action themselves. So the best way you can really show support for this show is not donating, liking, sharing it with your friends. That's great. But what really gets me excited is when people are inspired by this to take action themselves, to protect the land where they live, to build up community support for self-determination and so on. So thank you very much once again. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Tish. And we'll see everyone on the front lines.
Thanks, Max.
Thanks, Max.
Bye.
I want to thank you for listening to our show and let you know a few ways you can support Truth and Reckoning. First, share this broadcast with your friends and family. Leave a positive review via your podcast app. Visit the Truth and Reckoning YouTube channel and leave a thumbs up and a comment. The full scope of the work of CELDF, including this show, comes with a financial cost. So if you're able to make a donation, go to CELDF.org. That's CELDF.org. But most importantly, our goal for this show is to empower you to take action. So the best way you can show your support is to get involved with your community and protecting the place where you live. Thank you very much.